James reluctantly accompanied his wife, Emily, to her annual office gathering held at an upscale rooftop venue in downtown Chicago. The glittering skyline provided a stunning backdrop as sharply dressed professionals in suits and cocktail dresses mingled, exchanging laughter and clinking glasses. As a dedicated small business owner, James felt completely out of place in this corporate setting that seemed so natural to Emily. This year, she had been especially eager for the event, spending extra time perfecting her look while brushing off his casual questions about the guest list. Now, as he leaned against the bar, feeling more like an afterthought than a guest, he couldn't ignore how effortlessly Emily navigated the room, engaging her colleagues with charm while barely acknowledging his presence. A quiet yet undeniable distance between them began to settle in his gut, an unease he hadn't experienced before. Reflecting on that night, James would later recall with bitterness, "That was the evening I realized just how much of a stranger my wife had become to me." What started as a night of trivial small talk would soon spiral into an unforgettable confrontation, one that would change his life forever. He shuddered as he recalled, "I thought I was just attending a party. I had no idea I was walking into the most humiliating and dangerous night of my life." As James nursed his drink, surveying the crowd with growing discomfort, an unsettling realization crept over him. Emily's laughter rang through the air, effortlessly blending with the chatter of her co-workers, yet her excitement now seemed misplaced. It wasn't about enjoying the evening with him. It was about maintaining an image. Then he noticed something more disturbing. Groups of colleagues exchanged hushed whispers, their eyes flickering toward him before quickly looking away. It wasn't paranoia. The tension in the air was unmistakable, and it was closing in on him. He debated whether to confront Emily about her distant behavior or simply leave. But before he could decide, she approached him. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man James had never met but immediately disliked. His name was Jake, a co-worker whose presence radiated an overconfidence that set off alarm bells. The way he lingered too close to Emily, the casual placement of his hand on her back, it all sent red flags surging through James's mind. Jake met James's gaze with a smirk, his voice laced with smugness as he spoke. "So you're her husband?" The words carried an edge, as if daring James to react. Then, with the same cocky arrogance, Jake added, "I'm going to dance with her now." James barely had time to process the audacity of the statement before Emily responded. But instead of dismissing Jake's nerve or even looking to James for reassurance, she simply shrugged and said, "You don't need his permission." Her tone was light, almost playful, as she turned toward Jake and urged, "Come on." A stunned silence settled over James. His pulse pounded as frustration surged inside him. He had expected Emily to laugh off Jake's boldness, to challenge his words, or at the very least, to acknowledge him in some way. But she didn't. Instead, she sided with Jake, so effortlessly, so casually, as though James's presence held no weight. The words cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't just about what she said. It was the ease with which she dismissed his feelings in front of another man. At that moment, James realized the woman he thought he knew had become someone entirely different. Jake, emboldened by Emily's indifference, didn't back down. If anything, he leaned in closer, his grin darkening as he met James's eyes. "You don't own her, buddy," he sneered. "I'm going to dance with her, and maybe even more." The arrogance in his voice sent a wave of cold fury through James. His fists clenched involuntarily, his body rigid with barely contained rage. Every instinct screamed at him to react, but he forced himself to stay still. Then, as if to twist the knife further, Jake casually placed his hand on Emily's arm, guiding her toward the dance floor. It wasn't an impulsive move, it was deliberate, and as they walked away, James understood. This wasn't just an act of arrogance. It was a declaration of war. James's mind raced, his humiliation deepening with every step they took. The bond he once believed unbreakable between him and Emily had just been torn apart before his eyes. A confrontation was inevitable. He could feel it brewing like a storm ready to strike. From the edge of the dance floor, James could barely contain the fury boiling inside him. He watched, his jaw clenched, as Jake and Emily moved together in a way that was anything but appropriate. Their dance wasn't just playful, it was intimate, far too suggestive for a work event, or any event where a husband should be present. Jake's hands lingered at her waist, pulling her in, and she didn't resist. She didn't step away. She didn't even look uncomfortable. The betrayal sliced through James like a blade, but he forced himself to stay in control, reminding himself of the consequences of losing his temper in front of an audience. Still, every fiber of his being screamed at him to put an end to this. Then Jake went too far. With a smirk directed right at James, he slid his hands beneath Emily's blouse, fingers tracing along her back as if her husband wasn't standing right there, watching. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. A ripple of shocked gasps spread to the crowd, their stunned expressions confirming that this was as outrageous as it seemed. James's restraint shattered. Humiliation and rage crashed over him like a tidal wave, drowning out everything else. He stormed across the room, his voice shaking with fury as he shouted for Jake to back off. The crowd instinctively parted, all eyes locking onto him. But Jake didn't retreat. If anything, he leaned in closer to Emily, a smug grin plastered on his face as if daring James to do something about it. "And what exactly are you going to do?" Jake taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. James's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer, uncontrollable rage surging through him. Enough. Without another word, he shifted his jacket just enough to reveal what was concealed beneath it. Not enough to cause a panic, but just enough for Jake and those nearby to see. The reaction was instant. The music cut off. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every bit of movement in the room ceased as the weight of the moment settled in. James's voice, now low and deliberate, sliced through the suffocating stillness. "Step away from my wife. Now." The intensity in his glare made it clear this wasn't a request. For a split second, even Jake hesitated, his smirk faltering ever so slightly. But then, emboldened by the crowd's attention, and perhaps the alcohol fueling his reckless confidence, he let out a mocking chuckle. "What's the matter, James?" he sneered. "Afraid she might enjoy this more than she ever enjoyed you?" The words were a match to gasoline. James's blood ran hot, his vision narrowing on the smug expression that practically begged for a response. Emily stood frozen between them, her face unreadable. The crowd, now dead silent, watched with wide eyes, their attention darting back and forth between the two men. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. They were all waiting to see who would break first. Jake, ever the provocateur, leaned in even closer to Emily, pushing the limits of how far he could take this. His arrogance was insufferable. James didn't think. He didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he stepped forward and swung. His fist collided with Jake's jaw with a sickening crack. The force sent Jake stumbling backward, crashing into a nearby table. A collective gasp swept through the room. Some recoiled in shock, while others rushed forward in anticipation of an all-out brawl. Jake groaned, clutching his face as he glared up at James. The cockiness he had flaunted just moments ago was gone, replaced by something else. Anger, humiliation, maybe even fear. The way of what just happened hung heavy in the air. The concealed weapon was no longer in use, but its presence still lingered, a silent reminder of just how far James could have taken things. But he didn't need to. With a single, precise strike, he had already shattered everything. Jake's overconfidence had finally crumbled, exposing his true nature in front of the very crowd he had tried so hard to impress. The moment James's fist connected, the impact was undeniable. Security rushed in, scrambling to contain the escalating situation. Dazed and humiliated, Jake was swiftly hauled away, his once proud demeanor shattered. The room buzzed with hushed murmurs, disbelief rippling through the guests as they processed what had just unfolded. James stood motionless, his fist still clenched, his pulse pounding in his ears. Though the physical fight was over, the emotional fallout was only beginning to take hold. The night was far from finished. This was just the start of something far worse. As the tension in the air slowly faded, it became clear that the confrontation had left a lasting scar on the evening. Security worked quickly to restore order, but the damage was irreversible. Jake, still reeling from the blow, cradled his bruised jaw as he was led out of the venue. His smug arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by an expression of bitter humiliation. The cocky smirk he had worn all night had vanished, replaced by a scowl of defeat. Whispers followed him as he exited, judgmental stares burning into his back. The man who had thrived on attention was now reduced to nothing more than an embarrassment. His departure signaled the end of his bravado, but for James, the real battle was only beginning. The moment Jake was gone, Emily, who had remained silent during the altercation, suddenly lashed out. Her voice, sharp with fury and desperation, cut through the lingering silence as she turned on James, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted. "You've ruined everything." Instead of acknowledging Jake's blatant disrespect or her own role in the situation, she shifted all the blame onto James. Her desperate attempt to paint herself as a victim only deepened the wound of betrayal already festering inside him. She berated him in front of everyone, her words dripping with accusation. She called him reckless, accused him of humiliating her, and made it seem as if he was the one who had gone too far. The crowd, which had just witnessed Jake's downfall, now found themselves watching something even more devastating: the public unraveling of a marriage. The pitying glances and quiet murmurs from the guests only intensified James's turmoil. He stood there, his fists still clenched, realizing that this was never just about Jake. This was about something much bigger. The rot in their relationship that had been festering beneath the surface now lay bare for everyone to see. That night marked the beginning of the end. In the days that followed, the truth came crashing down like a tidal wave. Jake's shameless behavior at the party had been a reckless mistake. It had been the symptom of something far deeper. James pieced it all together, and the realization cut deeper than any punch ever could. Emily's excitement leading up to the event, the knowing glances from her colleagues, the whispers that had circled the room that night, all made sense now. Nearly everyone at her workplace had known the truth. She had been having an affair with Jake. The humiliation James had felt that night only worsened as the full scope of her betrayal unraveled before him. But along with the pain, something else emerged: determination. He refused to let this betrayal define him. And Emily, her choices didn't just destroy their marriage. They ruined her standing at work as well. Word of the scandal spread like wildfire, and as more details surfaced about her affair with Jake, she became a pariah. The same colleagues who once admired her now kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with the disgrace she had brought upon herself. For James, the night had begun as a quiet struggle to fit into a world where he didn't belong. By the end of it, he had walked away from something much greater, his past, and he had no intention of looking back. After the scandalous events of that night, Emily and Jake faced the inevitable fallout. Their reckless actions had not only shattered their personal lives, but also sent ripples through their professional world. Jake's behavior at the party didn't go unnoticed. Reports flooded into HR, and within weeks, his inappropriate conduct cost him his job. His downfall was just as public as a humiliating confrontation that exposed his affair, leaving both him and Emily to deal with the harsh consequences of their choices. For James, clarity came swiftly. He refused to let Emily manipulate him into staying in a marriage that had already been destroyed. Without hesitation, he filed for divorce, unwilling to endure any more deception or heartbreak. The betrayal had devastated him, but the decision to walk away brought something unexpected: a sense of empowerment. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was reclaiming control over his own life. The legal process was grueling, but with every step, James found solace in knowing he had chosen integrity over compromise. While Emily's deceit led to her own undoing, he held his head high, confident in the fact that he had made the right choice. Reflecting on everything, James acknowledged the pain, but also recognized the strength he had gained. Facing the harsh truth and standing up for himself had been difficult, but it had also been liberating. That fateful night had reshaped his life entirely. It was a turning point that forced him to confront the reality of his marriage. The betrayal, as deeply as it cut, opened his eyes. Staying in a relationship where he was disregarded and disrespected would have only chipped away at his self-worth. By walking away, he made a decision to put his dignity first, no matter how difficult it was. Looking back, James understood the true power of self-respect. He had faced the toxicity in his marriage head-on and had the courage to remove himself from an environment that was slowly destroying his happiness. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save you, he reflected. James strongly believed that no one should feel obligated to stay in a relationship where they are mistreated, whether it be a partner, a friend, or anyone else. Letting go of toxic people isn't just about ending a relationship. It's about making space for healthier opportunities and a brighter future. In his final thoughts, James expressed gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it had given him. That difficult chapter had ultimately made him stronger and more self-assured. Self-respect isn't something you wait for others to give you, he shared. It's something you claim for yourself. His voice was steady, but the weight of his journey was evident as he delivered one final reflection. That night taught me something I'll never forget. You can't control someone's loyalty, but you can control how much of yourself you're willing to lose for them. That realization became the foundation of his healing. He couldn't change Emily's actions, nor could he force her to be faithful. But what he could control was his own sense of identity, his dignity, his integrity, and his willingness to walk away from something that no longer served him. Betrayal had been a painful teacher, but in the end, it taught him the most important lesson of all. The greatest act of loyalty is the one you show to yourself. Moving forward, James carried that truth with him. Love and commitment mattered, but never at the expense of self-respect. His story became more than just one of heartbreak. It was a testament to knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and refusing to let others diminish you. Because sometimes the only way to regain your power is to walk away.